Welcome to part 3 of this series. So far we've looked at the earliest history of e-commerce from before the days of the commercial use of the internet, and then how some early adopters found e-commerce success even in the 90s. In today's post we look at the noughties, the decade when running an e-commerce store became widely available to the masses. The noughties might be seen as a bit of a sweet spot for e-commerce. The market was not yet crowded, but many people were now internet users. By the end of the 90s, just 5% of people were online, but by 2010, this had risen to almost 30%. So the 2000s presented huge opportunities for retailers, and this was the era when we saw e-commerce frameworks like Shopify, Magento and BigCommerce launch. We also saw already established companies like Facebook and Google launch advertising services which allowed retailers to reach audiences they couldn't before. At the end of the 90s and early noughties, there was some trepidation and disappointment from retailers who had invested early in an online store but not really seen any significant return. However, they now found themselves ahead of the masses and in a position to capitalise on the huge influx of new internet users that would flood in over the next decade. The possibilities of what could be achieved on the internet were now clear, and many people scrambled to capitalise on this. Those that had adopted early and already had an online store saw the benefits of that investment when the increasing number of shoppers began to spend more online. At the start of the 2000s, the range of stores available was limited, so those who had a store were given the opportunity to take the lion's share of sales in their sector. But by 2009, the number of online stores had increased dramatically, and with that the competition. These changes drove higher demands from shoppers in terms of how your store performed, and you increasingly needed to give people a reason to come to you instead of the competition. Frameworks like Magento and Shopify were developed specifically to give businesses a solid base on which to build and customize their online store, saving a huge amount of time and money compared to building a store from scratch. In the early 2000s, it was clear to all that there was significant money to be made on the internet, and that an online presence was quickly becoming a key requirement for every business, even those that didn't actually sell online. In response to this, many companies saw an opportunity to supply paid products to businesses who were or soon would be selling or wanting to advertise their services. So as well as e-commerce frameworks, we also saw Google launch Adwords and Facebook launch Beacon, which allowed targeted advertising. Google first launched Adwords in the year 2000, allowing store owners to show adverts to Google users based on the search terms they'd entered. Google found Adwords to be an instant success after trials in 1999, and 1 year it turned over $70 million. Over the next few years, Google improved the filtering and display of ads, and in 2005 added the display network as an additional way in which ads could be displayed on websites using the AdSense program. Google has continued to expand and improve the functionality and possibilities offered by Adwords, and it remains a largely popular advertising method today. In 2006, Shopify launched and was created after finding existing e-commerce solutions to be lacking. It was developed to give a more modern and effective means to create an online store, providing store owners with a solid starting point to sell online. In 2009, an API was added which opened up the possibilities of customizing and adding to the standard functionality that was offered. With this came the App Store, where Shopify extensions could be listed and sold for any store owner to use. Shopify continues to be very popular today with countless thousands of active stores. Followed closely by controversy and significant concern around privacy, Facebook Beacon launched in 2007. This allowed Facebook to collect browsing data from users while on external websites in order to show friends a user's browsing activity and serve targeted ads. The requirement for a user to consent to their data being shared was soon demanded and then added. Beacon soon attracted legal action, with the service then being shut down in 2009. Magento was launched in 2008 and offered a level of customization and flexibility not seen before. You were given full access to the code base along with effective means by which to customize or extend any base functionality. This unparalleled level of flexibility did, however, mean increased complexity, requiring more development time and investment before launch. But if you had the budget to spend, you would end up with exactly the store you wanted, whatever your business requirements, and this level of customization remains today. The release of Community Edition, which was completely open source, accelerated the take-up of Magento, and the framework rapidly became a hugely popular option for e-commerce store owners. Magento, now owned by Adobe and with the paid edition rebranded to Adobe Commerce, remains an extremely popular choice for store owners worldwide, with countless thousands of active stores today. In 2009, BigCommerce launched, most directly competing with Shopify. It had a very similar offering with customization possible through the API, but with a more complete offering of base functionality. BigCommerce is still a solid option for any e-commerce store today, although active store numbers aren't at the same level as Magento or Shopify. If you were one of the relative few who had an online store in the early 2000s, you had the opportunity to find significant success as customer numbers soared and those who weren't early adopters were playing catch up. By the end of the decade, there were already huge numbers of internet users, and if you were running an online store, you needed to take it to the next level if you wanted to stay ahead of the competition and attract more customers. This was definitely a decade of opportunity, and if you could get to the stage where your store was established and keep ahead of the competition as technology and customer expectations continued to advance, you could find significant success. By the end of the decade, e-commerce was fast becoming fiercely competitive, requiring significant investment and a professional approach to running a store. Thanks for watching part 3. In our final part next week, we see e-commerce continue its huge expansion and how one new technology introduced a massive shift in how people use the internet, the smartphone. See you next week.